The old house sat quietly at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by sprawling oaks and wildflowers. Its charm, though slightly faded by time, held a promise of warmth and love to anyone who entered. For David and Laura, the house was their dream home, a sanctuary where they could raise their 6-month-old daughter, Emma. The couple had recently moved in, eager to start fresh and create cherished memories. Along with them came Max, their loyal German shepherd, who had been with David since before he met Laura. Max was protective, intelligent, and affectionate. A dog who had always been trusted with their lives. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. For weeks after settling in, everything seemed perfect. Laura decorated Emma's nursery with delicate pastel hues, her favorite stuffed animals arranged neatly in the crib. At night, Max would lie at the foot of Emma's crib, his soft breathing blending with the baby's occasional coos and cries. David often joked that Max had become Emma's unofficial guardian, keeping a watchful eye on the baby. But one night, something changed. It started with a low growl, almost imperceptible in the stillness of the house. David and Laura dismissed it as a dream when they heard Max growl faintly, but over the next few nights, the growling became more frequent and intense. Max would position himself between Emma's crib and the door, his ears pinned back and teeth slightly bared. His hackles would rise, and his normally soft brown eyes took on a steely focus, fixed on the darkened corners of the room. At first, David thought Max was reacting to the new environment. Perhaps there were animals outside the house, he reasoned, or lingering scents from the previous owners. Laura was less convinced, finding Max's behavior unnerving, especially since it was directed so specifically at Emma's nursery. One evening, as Laura rocked Emma to sleep, she noticed Max standing rigidly by the door, growling at something she couldn't see. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Max didn't move, his growl deepening as if in response to an unseen threat. A cold shiver ran down Laura's spine. She tried to shake off the creeping fear, but that night she insisted David check the nursery thoroughly before they went to bed. David obliged, searching every corner of the room. He checked under the crib, in the closet, and even behind the curtains. There was nothing there. Nothing he could see, at least. Satisfied, he reassured Laura. "It's probably just Max adjusting. Dogs pick up on things we don't. Maybe it's just a stray animal outside." But Max's behavior only grew more alarming. The growling escalated into barking, sharp and loud, waking the baby in the middle of the night. Emma would wail uncontrollably, her tiny hands clutching at the air as if seeking protection. David and Laura were at a loss. They tried keeping Max out of the nursery, but he would scratch and whine at the door, desperate to be let in. On one such night, when David finally opened the door, Max charged in, positioning himself between Emma's crib and the window, his teeth bared and growls vibrating through the room. Something was wrong, David realized. This wasn't normal behavior, even for a protective dog like Max. He decided to set up a baby monitor with a night vision camera in Emma's nursery to see what was happening during the night. If Max was reacting to something specific, perhaps they could figure out what it was. That night, David stayed up late, watching the monitor from the living room while Laura tried to get some rest. At first, everything seemed normal. Emma lay peacefully in her crib, Max lying protectively at the foot. But around 2 a.m., Max stirred. His ears perked up, and his head snapped toward the far corner of the room. David leaned closer to the monitor, straining to see what Max was looking at, but there was nothing there, just shadows cast by the dim glow of the nightlight. Then Emma stirred in her sleep, her tiny face scrunching as if in discomfort. Max growled low and deep, his body tense and his gaze fixed on the same corner. Suddenly, the monitor's screen flickered. For a brief moment, static filled the screen, and when the picture returned, David thought he saw something, a faint movement in the shadows. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it sent a chill down his spine. The next morning, David didn't mention what he saw to Laura. He wasn't even sure what he had seen. Instead, he decided to conduct some research. He searched online for explanations ranging from mundane to supernatural. Articles about electromagnetic fields, mold spores, and even ghost sightings filled his screen. He tried to convince himself it was something rational. An old house with creaky floors and drafty windows could explain the eerie occurrences. But that night, things took a terrifying turn. Around midnight, Max's barking woke David and Laura. They rushed to the nursery to find Max standing on his hind legs, paws on the crib, barking furiously at the ceiling. Emma was crying hysterically, her tiny fists trembling. Laura scooped up the baby while David tried to calm Max, but the dog wouldn't budge. His barking grew more frantic, his body trembling as if he was ready to attack. "David, do something!" Laura cried, her voice panicked. David grabbed Max by the collar, pulling him out of the nursery. As he did, he glanced back at the crib and froze. There, just above the crib, was a faint, shifting shadow. It wasn't cast by anything in the room. It seemed to float, amorphous and unnatural. David's blood ran cold. He yanked Max out of the room, slamming the door behind him. "What was that?" Laura demanded, clutching Emma tightly. "I don't know," David admitted, his voice shaking. "But we're not staying here tonight." They packed a bag and left the house, spending the night at a nearby motel. The next day, David called a paranormal investigator. It was a step he never thought he'd take, but he couldn't ignore what he had seen. The investigator, a middle-aged woman named Margaret, arrived with an assortment of equipment: EMF meters, thermal cameras, and audio recorders. She listened carefully as David and Laura recounted their experiences. Max, sitting by David's side, seemed to watch Margaret intently, as if understanding the gravity of her presence. Margaret spent hours in the house, setting up her equipment and observing the nursery. As the sun set and the house grew quiet, she conducted a series of tests. At one point, she placed a digital recorder near Emma's crib and asked questions aloud. "Is there someone here? Why are you in this house?" The room remained silent, but when Margaret played back the recording, a faint, raspy whisper answered one of her questions. "Mine?" Laura gasped, clutching David's arm. Max let out a low growl, his ears flattening against his head. Margaret's expression was grim. "There's something here," she confirmed. "Something that doesn't want to leave." Further investigation revealed that the previous owners had experienced similar disturbances, but had never spoken about them publicly. Records showed that the house had a dark history. A family who lived there decades ago suffered a tragedy when their infant daughter died mysteriously in her crib. The mother, consumed by grief, was said to have become reclusive and unstable. She eventually passed away in the house, her death shrouded in whispers of despair and guilt. Margaret performed a cleansing ritual, walking through the house with sage and reciting prayers. Max followed her every step, his body tense but his growling subdued. When she finished, she advised David and Laura to monitor the house closely and call her if anything else happened. For a while, things seemed to return to normal. Max stopped growling at night and Emma slept peacefully in her crib. But David couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered. He kept the baby monitor on every night, watching for any signs of the shadow. One night, as he sat in the living room with Max by his side, the monitor flickered again. This time there was no shadow, no movement, just the faint sound of a lullaby, one they had never played for Emma. David felt a chill creep over him. Max stood up, his ears perked, and stared at the monitor. Slowly, his growl began to rumble, low and steady. The house, it seemed, still held its secrets. David stared at the monitor, his breath caught in his throat. The lullaby's haunting notes played softly, seemingly drifting through the room. Max, rigid beside him, let out a sharp bark, his gaze locked on the screen as though he could see beyond its dim glow. The melody grew faint and faded into silence, but the unease it left behind hung thick in the air. Laura rushed into the room, holding Emma close. "What was that?" she whispered, her face pale. She had heard it too. There was no mistaking the strange, ghostly sound. David didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the flashlight and motioned for Laura to stay put. Max followed him as they crept toward the nursery. Every step seemed louder in the stillness of the house. When David pushed the door open, the room was still, bathed in the soft light of the night lamp. Nothing appeared out of place, yet the air felt heavy, oppressive, as if an unseen presence lingered. Max growled low but didn't bark. He walked to the crib and sniffed the air, his body taut. David's heart pounded as he stood there, uncertain of what to do next. As David stood in the nursery, the oppressive silence pressed against him. The air felt colder here, dense with an inexplicable weight that seemed to settle in his chest. Max circled the crib, his every step deliberate and cautious. His growl had stopped, replaced by a low whine, as though even he couldn't make sense of what was happening. David's gaze shifted to the corner where Max had fixated before. The shadows there seemed darker, deeper than they should have been. He flicked the flashlight toward it, the beam cutting through the dimness. Nothing moved, yet David's unease didn't waver. He crouched next to Max and placed a hand on the dog's neck, feeling the tension rippling beneath his fur. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us. What are your thoughts on why the dog growled at the baby every night? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.